It's 10:30 at night. I've been out here all day, and I haven't eaten all day, and I don't care because it's starting to look like we got a motor again. All right, here we go. Well, we're making progress on the car, on doing the head swap. Got the new old school heads, the 186 small humps. Put a coat of paint on those, so they should be about ready to go on the car. They've been curing up all day because the weather flip-flopped on us again, and we went from being really cold last weekend to back up to, I don't know, maybe almost 80 today. Let's see, what's it say in the shop? Yeah. Just shy of 80 degrees. And I've been cleaning up the motor, and we had a bit of a mess to take care of after we took it apart. Had to clean up the mating surfaces and clean up the valley. We got the little pile of baby poop out of there. It didn't, I don't think we, like I said in the last video, if you watched that one, I think we caught that in time before it did any real damage. But we'll go ahead and look at that. So yeah, we had that rust that started there, and then all our pistons were pretty coked up with carbon. I did a basic clean on those. Nothing too fancy, just wanted to get to where I could actually see them, make sure there wasn't any issues, no surface issues there. Clean the cylinder bores a little bit, and there's definitely indication that this motor sat for a long time before it was put together. Grabbing a flashlight, you can see in the walls of the piston where the actual piston sat for an extended period of time, and some moisture had probably gotten in there. I don't think there's too much. I mean, some of the cylinders look really good. I can still see crosshatch in that one. A little bit of up and down there, but I mean, realistically, the best thing that we could do with this motor would be to take it out, take it to a machine shop and have it bored out, or at least honed out and cleaned up. But we're not going to do that because that's not the plan. I pulled all the lifters out, checked all the lifter bores, and that all looked pretty good. I was mostly concerned about these two back here because of where the corrosion was. Actually, it was all three of those. And there is just a hair bit on that lifter right there. I may pull that back out and take a brass brush to that and clean that off. I missed that, putting them back in. But overall, we're making progress on getting back to putting this guy back together. I did notice on, I think it was this one and another lifter over here, that we've got a distinctive stripe on the lifter face. And that's not ideal. That means that this lifter is probably not rotating the way it's supposed to moving it around a little bit, trying to make sure that at least at some point it shows up on camera with the reflection on there. But that distinctive stripe on there indicates that the lifter is not rotating consistently like it should. Let's see, this one come back out? Can I get a hold of it? I did oil these before I put them in. I can't even get a hold of it. Maybe I can get a hold of this one. Oh, almost. Oh, they're so slippery when they're oily. There we go. Oh. So you can see on the face of that one, there's no stripe on there. It's just all nice even color. That means that this lifter is rotating as it goes around the camshaft the way it should. So that, oh goodness, they're so slippery when they're covered in oil. But yeah, so that stripe on this one is a good early indicator that we're probably looking at having to do a cam in this motor sometime soon. And before we put a cam in it, I probably would take it to pull it all the way out, at least dingle ball hone it and get the cylinders cleaned up. If not, take it to a machine shop and actually have it gone through to make sure that it's good. But that's a future problem to address. It'll be what it'll be for now. It wasn't showing any signs of a dead hole, and from what I can see, the cam hasn't been wiped yet, and that lifter face is just now showing, well, there's no mushrooming to it or anything. It fits good still. So I think as long as I keep a good high zinc oil in it, and hopefully it'll hold up for a while, and we can drive it as is. But yeah, so we're making progress there. Next thing I'm going to be doing is I would take the heads, and I'll get those set on here and just set in place, and we'll get some rockers on there and check the valve clearance, make sure everything's good with the new heads going on, make sure the push rods are the right length, and go from there. So once I have that on there, I will probably jump back on camera, show you what I'm doing there. I did get a set of valve check springs, show you what those are all about. They come in, they're great for use with a hydraulic lifter, and once we're doing that, I'll explain why those are great, preferred for a hydraulic lifter, not as critical for a solid lifter, but yeah, so that's where we're at. We're making progress. If all goes well, we'll have the heads back on today and torque down, and maybe even get to the intake, which I still have to clean. So we'll see. We might not get to that until tomorrow, which will probably still be in this same video. Anyway, we'll be back with you in a bit. Got the passenger side head. This is the new old head that we're going to be putting on here, and basically I took, and I've got 2 bolts in it to just kind of cinch it down in place, and I cleaned up and used the old head gasket just so it had a pretty close spacing to where the head's going to seat. And I've got some of the setup springs in the number 2 position on the head so that I can check the rockers and everything. What makes these nice over your typical valve spring is they're very low pressure. It's basically enough to make the valve travel up and down, so that you can check your rocker clearances and your alignment over the valve stem, all that good stuff. So I've got these set up on the intake and exhaust, which is the opposite of the way I pushed them. That's the intake and that's the exhaust. And you can see I can just push those down with my fingers. So those work really well. I'm really glad I went with those. The ones I got are from Moroso, part number 62380. The reason I went with these over others is it was only a couple bucks more to get a pack of 8 versus a pack of 2 from most of the other competitors. They were like 15 to 20 bucks for a pair for most of the competitors, and these were like $22 or something, $24, something like that, for 8 of them. So if you wanted to set up an entire head, a 2-valve, 4 cylinders at 2 valves each, like a small block Chevy or small block Ford or big block Chevy, whatever. Anything that's 2 valves per cylinder with 4 cylinders in line, you could set the whole thing up if you wanted to check everything. I wasn't too worried about checking all of them because I anticipate this is a pretty stock level setup. My biggest thing that I wanted to be able to check was whether or not I had the room to run the 1:6 ratio roller rockers, whether they cleared the spring cups for the valve spring, and if the push rod had enough clearance for everything to move without binding, and to make sure that it didn't create any interference with the valve and the piston. So I only set it up on the one. All of them are basically going to be the same in this application. There's not real tight tolerances here, especially since the pistons that are in here are a slightly dished piston with valve relief, so I wasn't worried about that. You want to see size comparison on those. It's a pretty sizable difference, and there's zero chance I can compress this with my hand, and you can see I can pop that one around. So what I've got set up right now is I have no clue what cam is in this car, and I don't have any way to measure the duration on the cam, but I can measure the lift. It's not a perfect measurement, but it's pretty close. So what I've done is I've got a dial indicator set up on the top of the push rod because I didn't have a way to get it down here on top of a lifter with my mount. I couldn't figure out an orientation. So this will be fairly close. Before, I already measured the exhaust. It's 310 lift on the cam with the exhaust. And I'll show you what it looks like measuring the intake. So as we come around, the intake starts moving, and I was up here, I got 0 at the top, so we're at 100 thou, 200 thou, there's 300, and it's dropping back down, which means that the intake has the lift on that lobe is about 300 thousandths at the cam, which that by itself doesn't really match up with typical cam specs, because cam specs talk about how much lift you're going to get at your valve in most cases. A lot of cams, if you look further into the specs, they'll actually tell you what the lobe lift is. And the reason that that matters is if you run a 1:5 ratio rocker versus a 1:6, the amount of lift at the valve is actually different based on the ratio of the rocker. So if you have a 300 lift lobe on your cam, you'll take the 0.300, and if we were running the 1.52 ratio, I would take this times 1.52, and I'd get a valve lift of 456. So, and that's indicative of what you usually see on your cam specs, at least for a small block Chevy. You'll see them in relationship to valve lift with a stock ratio rocker, which typically 1.52 is considered the stock ratio. So that would give me a lift of 0.456 at the valve. But if I put the 1.6 in there, 0.300 times 1.6, I get a valve lift of 480. So that's where you're seeing the difference. And more valve lift means more flow. More flow means more fuel, more air. More fuel, more air means more power. In simple terms, there's a little more to it than that. The other thing you'll get if you run the 1:6 ratio is it'll increase duration slightly, because the valve is going to open slightly quicker to 50 thousandths, and it's going to close quicker at 50 thousandths, or a little bit later at 50 thousandths, because the ratio of the rocker is longer. So that's real good. This is probably not a stock cam. Stock cams most of the time on small block Chevys that weren't a high performance version from the factory probably had around a 400 to a 425 lift at the valve. So we're a little bit over that. So I think that this might be an RV cam, maybe. Maybe it was changed and put in there. Someone put an RV cam in it. Just slightly overstock, probably has a little more duration. That would explain the way the car idles a little bit, that it's got a little bit more aggressive lobe separation angle, which gives it a little bit more lumpy idle. But yeah, so that's all good stuff. That amount of lift, even if we go to the 1:6 ratio, and we have 480 lift, that's still perfectly fine on these 186 heads, even on the stock style springs. We won't go into coil bind or anything like that. I'm pretty sure these stock springs are good to right around 500 lift, 500, 510. So we shouldn't have any issues with that. This motor is not going to turn real high RPM either, just because there's nothing too special about it. So let me get the indicator out of the way now that we've measured that. Oh, excuse me. And then I did take, I don't have Dicam, which works really good for marking the top of the valves so you can see where your, whoops, there it is. Put Dicam on the top of the valves and roll the valve train around, and it usually works pretty good for showing you where the rocker is actually traveling on there. But I don't have any Dicam, so I took a Sharpie and I marked that up, and well, it kind of worked. I could see it when I put a flashlight on it and looked at it just the right angle. I could see the line where it's at, and both the 152 that I just set on there and the 1.6, which I'll throw on the other side. Side note, with roller rockers in the trunnion in here, this bearing section in the middle, that's your trunnion. There's a round side, and flip it around again, and a flat side. That flat side always goes up against the keeper, and most roller rockers require a poly lock to fit down in there. The stock styles don't fit in them, but always make sure that flat side's up. If you put the round side up, you'll have problems. Yeah, so and then when you're setting these up on the lightweight springs for checking springs, you don't need to go, you don't actually set them the way you do when you're setting these with all the preload in them, because these, when you preload, you go to 0 lash, and then you put another anywhere from 1/4 to 3/4 depending on your conditions. If it's a new lifter, I believe most of them are recommended 1/2 to 3/4 of preload once you're at 0 lash. If you do that with the check springs, it'll just start opening the valve because this spring is so light. It won't actually put any preload on your lifter, which when you have a hydraulic lifter, is why biggest reason why these check springs are really useful is if you rotate the engine around on a stock spring or an actual valve spring that you're going to run, with the engine not running and no oil pressure actually being fed into the lifter will bleed down and start to collapse because this spring, the valve spring, is stiffer than the internals of the lifter, however the spring and hydraulic that works in the lifter is. So it'll bleed down your lifter and you'll lose your lash, and the more you do that, the more oil you squeeze out of the lifter and the worse it gets. With the check springs, because they're lighter than the lifter, your lifter is not going to collapse as you're rotating all this around, so you're going to be able to check your geometry accurately. So what I do is, what I did anyway, which I'm pretty sure is the appropriate way to do this, is the only reason I have a socket is because this one's kind of tight in this housing for me to get my fingers in there. But is I take my push rod and wiggle it up and down, and I tighten it until I can't wiggle up and down at all, but I can still spin. That's it. Now I can still spin it. It's at 0 lash, but a little bit more. There we go. It's at 0 lash, but no up and down, but I can still spin it. And then same thing over here. up and down, tighten it until I can't go up and down, and just a pinch more, and we're talking finger tight, and then I can only spin it. Now that it's in that position, and yes, I have a 1.52 here and a 1.6 there. That's not gonna, for what I'm about to show, what I'm doing, it doesn't matter. But yeah, that's it. They're just finger tight. That's it. Because we're not actually running it, I didn't put the lock set screw in the top to lock it in place because it's going around slow by hand. And then you just start cranking it around as such, and you can see what your geometry is going to do. My lifter's coming up, my rocker's tipping in, no resistance, no fighting anything, and then the intake's going. So, and you can see, you know, and throwing a wrench. It's like the 5th time today I've done that. But yeah, so that's it. And you can see I cycled it. I still have no vertical movement. I can still spin it. Oh, that one I do, so I must not have had that one seated. Oh, the lifter wasn't all the way down when I set it the first time. That's what that was, because I had the dial indicator on it. But yeah, so in which case, if I hadn't already checked this, I would do it again because I didn't have it set up right. But yeah, so that's it. It's simple, that easy. I have no binding whatsoever with the 1:6 ratio, so we're going to put the 1:6 ratio on there. Since it's kind of hard to see what marks were left behind with the Sharpie, it didn't leave good marks. I also took my inspection mirror, held it up at an angle, inspection mirror, held it up at an angle like this so I can visually see where the wheel is sitting on the top of the valve. And for a stock motor application, they're fairly close to center. I think it's more than sufficient for what this motor is going to be. Worst case, it has a problem, something breaks, and we have to rebuild it, and well, then the rest of the problems can actually get fixed in the bottom end, whatever other problems might be down there. But yeah, so that's the fun, that's the progress we've made. Next step is I got to pull this head back off and swap the actual valve springs back in. Once the valve springs are in, then I can pull the new head gaskets, put the new head gaskets in, drop the heads in, and actually torque it up. Once the head's torqued in, then we can go through, install our rockers, lash those all out. One thing that I said before in the previous video, and I'll say again in this video, make sure when you're doing head studs or head bolts that you put sealant on them. They need sealant because they go into water jackets. Almost all of them go into water jackets. So it's just a good idea to put sealant on all of them. I am going to reuse the studs, or I keep calling them studs, the head bolts that I took out of it. I didn't see any issues with those. They're old Chevy head bolts, and this isn't a high performance application, so they're not going to see high stress of like a race engine type situation. So those should be perfectly fine as long as they torque without any issue. So during the torquing process, I will, not twerking, torquing process, I will make sure that those all go down and tighten up properly. But yeah, so there's not going to be a whole lot of excitement to that, just muscling stuff into place and tightening it down. There is I won't do it on video because it'll be slow and boring and tedious, but there is a specific order for tightening the head bolts. So when you're doing that, whether head bolts or head studs, you want to make sure you have that on hand to look at and make sure that you torque them in the proper order. Basically, the way it works is from center out, and that magically makes it work properly. If you don't torque them in that order, you're liable to have issues. I'm not an expert on that stuff, so I don't know how that affects the way the head moves and connects up with the mating surfaces of the block. I don't know what the magic juju is of that, but there is, I know it is a thing, so make sure that you look up that order, and I'll probably throw a picture of it on the screen, you know, like right here or something, so you can see, you know, there's a specific order, and watch me be saying it wrong, but I'm 99% sure that it's from the inside. You'll start, you know, it's either starts here or starts here on the outside. I'm pretty sure it starts at the top and basically works in a circle from the center out. And I believe it's recommended to torque it in 3 stages. So you snug tight everything, and then you torque to the first number on all of them, then you torque to the second number on all of them, then torque to the third number on all of them. Might only be 2 is the typical, but I have to look it up to be 100% sure. So the next time I fire up the camera, we'll have the heads on, the rockers on, and hopefully be getting ready to throw an intake on. Once that's cleaned up, daylight is slowly starting to slip away on us, so that might happen tonight in the dark, or after dark, or it might happen tomorrow. We'll just have to wait and see. Well, I didn't make it quite as far as I would have liked to have gotten, but I do think I made good progress. So check it out. Here's where we're at. The heads are on. They're all torquedy down on that side and all torquedy down on that side. I remembered to drop the header back in there. It's not attached yet, but it's where it needs to be. The intake has not been actually cleaned yet. I just had to put it on there because, you know, that's what really starts bringing things together. I did go with the 1.6, as I was saying. I went with the 1.6 roller rockers because everything cleared. Gives me a little bit more lift out of the cam, and I had them. So typically I wouldn't, if I was going to buy new or I was doing a cam and lifter setup, I would stay with a 1.5 ratio and get a more aggressive cam. But since that's not what we're doing right now, we're making the best out of the cam that's in there by giving it a little bit of extra bump on the rocker. That's the Holley 4-barrel that I'm going to be running, at least for now. That's a 600 CFM vacuum secondary, 4160, your ultimate basic street carburetor. Nothing fancy, but in my opinion, I like it better than that Edelbrock deal over there. The intake is an Edelbrock Performer RPM that, once cleaned up, will look a whole lot better. Again, there's those little baby camel humps on there with accessory holes. That is a casting number of 3927186. 74 or 64 cc chambers, 194 intake valve, 150 exhaust valve. I didn't when I had those redone, I didn't go to 202s because the plan at that time wasn't to put them on a real high revving motor and go into a 202 valve. You really only see the benefits from that in high RPM. The smaller valves are actually going to have a little bit better low range. So, but they'll still flow really good, and we got a little bit more lift. We're a little under 500 on our total lift, somewhere around 480. So that'll be pretty good. But yeah, so that's, I mean, we made good progress. It's going to be, getting the intake cleaned up is going to be next on the list. You got to get that done. Once the intake's cleaned up, then I can get the carburetor actually mounted. I got a carb stud kit to do that. I'm probably going to run, I'm a big advocate or fan of running phenolic spacers. Get out of my way, Holley. Phenolic spacers in place of aluminum. They, in my opinion, and all the research I've done on them, so I think it's a pretty common opinion, they do a better job of creating a heat barrier between the intake and the carburetor, which helps reduce vapor lock. And it can also, depending on how much heat's getting to your carburetor, you can cause enough heat in the butterflies to cause them to start binding. And the reason I know that is I was having that problem on the red car. It was a different intake that sat lower, but I was having a problem where once the engine got hot, gas pedal would get real sticky, especially at idle, and you're trying to crack it open, and like had to kick the pedal to get it going. Excuse me, which made the car really difficult to drive. And it turned out it was a heat problem. I started with a heat dissipator. I was trying to keep the carburetor low for hood clearance reasons and various other things. But so I started with one of those plate systems that you run multiple gaskets, and it's a thin plate gasket, thin plate gasket, thin plate. They're like probably like a 12 gauge, or not even, probably less than that, probably like a 14 gauge, not quite an 1/8 inch thick carb spacer, basically, just a shim plate. And you stack those with gaskets in between, and it's supposed to help dissipate heat and keep from overheating the carb. That didn't get the job done, so I went to a phenolic spacer, and that fixed my problems, and I've used phenolic spacers ever since because I think they work great. And a little bit of carb spacer I've never seen an issue or information that says a little bit of carb spacer is a bad thing ever. Win-win. What else did we accomplish? All the head studs, or head studs, I keep calling them head studs, head bolts, went in with sealant on them. When we went through, let me get rid of some of this out of here. When we went through and did the rockers, the way I did that, I'm just going to put this over here on the floor. There we go. So the way I did that with the rockers whoa, you're falling over, to get them adjusted is, since these, well, first off, the lifters, if anybody was thinking it, all the lifters went back into the bores they came out of, because I did have them all out earlier. Once a solid lifter, or not a solid lifter, but a flat tappet lifter has been broke into a cam, you can't move it to a different location. It'll end up wiping the cam or wiping the lifter. So I made sure when I pulled all those out, I had them staged and marked where they went, and they all went back into the exact same spots they came out of to make sure that that wasn't an issue. And then since they are all broken, since this was a running motor, to set the initial lash or preload on the rockers, what I did is I took them to basically to zero last, where I could just barely turn the push rod once when the whichever piston is on its compression stroke, i.e. both valves are supposed to be fully closed. And when I got done with that, I brought the motor back over to top dead center, so that when I close it up and stab a distributor, I know exactly where that needs to go. But yeah, so I mean, all these, the initial set on all those should be good. Once we get a heat cycle on it, I'll have to pull valve covers and recheck them. Speaking of valve covers, one thing you have to keep in mind, let me adjust this, make it a little easier for me to hold. I had it at a bad angle. One thing to keep in mind when you're with valve covers is when you go to a roller rocker, or even the roller tips, if you decide to use a poly lock on them, which I do recommend. The poly locks are much easier for adjusting and setting up, and they have great there's a secondary level of confidence in how they secure the lifter, because on the poly lock, basically what you have is down here inside the center of the nut, you have a set screw. So you spin the nut down on your stud, rocker arm stud, and once you get it set with your lash, which it just spins nice and free until you're actually putting a little bit of pressure on the lifter, but it'll spin down, you get it set, and then you run the set screw down the center so that you create a pinch. Basically, you're pinching, the set screw's wanting to pull the nut up, and the nut's holding on, wanting to hold down. So you basically, it's almost like a jam nut type setup, which works great. They're easy to install. No special tools required. It's a combined effort between a box wrench and an Allen wrench, or in my case, which the actual right size for, it's over there on the table. But I use socket drive Allens for any time I can, because then you can just use ratchet. But yeah, so those are great. But if you do that and you go to those and you have standard size valve covers, your valve covers, these ones might actually have enough room. I'll have to actually cycle it. Most of the time, stock valve covers won't fit over roller rockers or poly locks, especially the mid-height ones like those. There are some stubby ones that are shorter poly locks, but it's not what I had, so it's not what I used. I think that those old Pro Stocks, I think those might be a deep valve cover, because this one, which the gasket's falling off, this is a factory 327, an OEM 327, diamond top, whatever, valve cover. And if I put this on here, interesting. Well, I'm going to eat my words right now, because apparently the particular setup that I have in here with these particular heads looks to fit under a stock valve cover, which might be kind of a trick. I'll have to think about that, because I might be able to use stock valve covers. I was thinking I was going to have to go to an oversized valve cover, which the only set that I have currently is the set that's over here on this motor. Let me grab the tape measure. I'll show you and see how much of a difference it is. All right. So the deep valve cover is, I think you can see that, it's 3/3. We'll go from right there, 3.5 from the flange to the top, right about 3.5. I come over here, which this will be harder to see because I can't look at it straight on. You're looking at the grill. Hey, there we go. The stock looks like it's only got about 2 to 2.25 on that one, and this one over here's got maybe 2.5. So it looks like those have about 2.5 inches. The stock's maybe about 2.25. Maybe that's enough with the combination of stuff that's in there. I'll have to roll it over, actually bolt them down, make sure they're seated all the way. And roll it over and make sure that nothing interferes. But maybe I won't need valve covers. I was thinking I was going to need to get, that gasket's catching. I'll just leave it for now. I was thinking I was going to need to get valve covers or rob the ones off of that car to get this one going, because that one's not going anywhere anytime soon. So if I just threw something else on there to cover it and keep the dust out, I mean, this motor's already living under a blanket just to keep the dust out of it, because there's no intake on it. But anyway, so yeah, that's where we're at. And enough for this video. That's going to wrap up part 2 of the head swap. We're getting there. We're almost back together. Like I said, hopefully I can get out here and get the motor finished up and back together tomorrow. And then I'll get it wired up on my own time, because we still got the alternator wiring to deal with, and get some of that cleaned up. And so that means hopefully we'll be driving, or at least running again by, I don't know, maybe next weekend. In the meantime, yeah, we'll see you guys on the next one. Someone say encore? Probably not. But as soon as I got done, and well, thought I was done, came over here to grab this 327 valve cover so I could put it back up on the shelf where it goes, and noticed that it actually is not sitting all the way down. So yeah, what I thought was the truth with this, the stock valve covers do not fit over the polylock and roller rocker setup that's here. It's probably hitting the polylocks right up here on the top, where this one's a little bit dented in for the design of valve cover, and it's not dented, it's actually stamped that way. It's the way it's supposed to be. But yeah, it's probably hitting right there is what's hitting it, but that means that it's down and pretty tight over all that. And so basically, if you're going to do polylocks and roller rockers, get taller valve covers. That's the overstock anyway. That's this short and sweet of that. I did grab, out of curiosity, I grabbed this one again, and we can slide it in there, and it actually is sitting down on the gasket. So this does have enough clearance to run. I don't think I'm going to run these because I'm not a fan of them, at least not for this type of build. I don't think the look is right. So they're probably not going to be a long-term thing, but they might be a short-term fill while we find the right valve covers for this. Or maybe I'll steal the Morosos off of the other car and run them and just throw these on there as covers. But yeah, let me grab that 327. So if you look at those side by side, you can easily see that this cast aluminum one is a much deeper valve cover than the 327 valve cover, and that would be why it offers enough clearance to cover up our valve train without hitting. Anyway, that's it for the Encore. Since I noticed that, I wanted to make sure I squeezed that in so that I wasn't giving bad information, making someone think they could run stock valve covers and have them clear this kind of setup. All right, guys, till next time. See ya.